I was born in a small market town where the church spire still rose higher than any minaret, yet today the call to prayer drifts across the rooftops at dawn, and the vicar has been told to remove the cross from the gate lest it offend. I walked the old high street last Tuesday and counted 3 new Islamic centres where once stood the butchers, the ironmongers, and the pub that served the same ale since 1789. A poster taped to the bus shelter announced that the council will soon rename the town square after a 10th century caliph. The ink was still wet. I remember when Labour spoke of heritage and hard work. My father voted for them because they promised dignity for miners and safety for steelworkers. Now the party sends out press releases boasting that every Year 7 pupil will spend twice as many hours on the life of the Prophet than on Churchill, Cromwell, Nelson, and Shakespeare combined. A leaked memo, passed to me by a friend in the education department, lists the new curriculum headings: The Glorious Expansion of Islam, the Myth of British Exceptionalism, Reassessing the Crusades from a Muslim Perspective. The memo ends with a cheerful note that pupils should be encouraged to view British history as a long apology. Last month, I attended the meeting at the Civic Hall. Mayor, a woman who once wore a red rosette and sang Jerusalem with tears in her eyes, now wore a green headscarf and began the evening with Al-Fatiha in Arabic. She told us that the statue of Sir Francis Drake would be melted down and recast into a monument celebrating the arrival of Islam on these shores. When an elderly naval veteran stood up to protest, 2 security guards escorted him out, and the mayor declared that disruptive colonial nostalgia would not be tolerated. I spoke to my daughter after school. She is 12. She told me that her history teacher, Mr. Khan, had said that the Battle of Trafalgar was an act of racist aggression against North African sailors. The class then coloured in pictures of Ottoman ships, while a playlist of nasheeds hummed from the interactive whiteboard. I asked whether she had learned about Drake, Raleigh, or the old sea dogs who kept the empire alive. She looked at me as if I had mentioned dragons. I rang the headmaster. He said that traditional British history had been suspended for the foreseeable future because it was incompatible with community cohesion. He added that Ofsted had congratulated the school on its progressive approach. I asked him whether children would ever learn about Magna Carta. He replied that Magna Carta had been placed in the optional module on medieval misunderstandings, right next to the section explaining why the Crusades were a crime against Islam. The local library used to hold a shelf of green leather-bound volumes titled The Oxford History of England. Last week those books were gone. In their place stood glossy paperbacks with titles like Why Britain Owes Islam Everything and The Islamic Golden Age That Saved the West. A librarian whispered to me that the old volumes had been sent for pulping because they contained offensive national triumphalism. I walked out before the tears came. My cousin works in Whitehall. He told me that a task force within the Department for Education has drawn up a 5-year plan to phase out every reference to the British Empire except as a catalogue of atrocities against Muslim peoples. Portraits of Wellington, Clive, and Kitchener have already been removed from the corridors. In their stead, hang framed Quranic verses in elegant calligraphy. The final stage, scheduled for 2027, is to replace the Union Jack on all public buildings with a banner bearing the Shahada in green and gold. I went to the remembrance service at the War Memorial. A Labour councillor stepped forward and laid a wreath shaped like a crescent moon. The vicar had been instructed not to recite the Lord Prayer, lest it marginalize other faiths. Instead, a Syrian imam praised the martyrs of the Ummah who had fallen resisting British imperialism. A poppy was deemed too militaristic, so we wore small green ribbons. The last post was replaced by a recording of the Adhan. Old soldiers stood in silence, medals hidden beneath raincoats. I tried to speak to my MP, a Labour woman who had once campaigned to save the local grammar school. Her constituency office now displays a large photograph of the Kaaba. Her assistant, a bearded young man in a thobe, told me that the member was busy preparing a bill to criminalize the public display of the cross. I left a letter anyway. I have not received a reply. The BBC has begun a new series titled Reclaiming Our Islamic Island. The trailer shows presenters walking through Canterbury Cathedral, explaining how the arches are derived from Moorish design. The narrator states that England was always destined to become part of the Dar al-Islam. I switched off the television and threw the remote across the room. I dug out my old school atlas from 1988. The pages smelled of dust and better days. I traced the pink blotches that once spanned the globe. My daughter asked what I was doing. I told her that these places used to sing God Save the Queen. She frowned and said that Mr. Khan had told her that the anthem was a colonial war cry. I attended Friday prayers at the new mega mosque because the council now holds public consultations there. The Imam spoke of the coming day when Sharia would guide every aspect of British life. The congregation cheered. Outside, a small group of pensioners waved Union Jacks and sang Land of Hope and Glory. The police arrived and arrested them for hate speech. I stood on the cliff above the channel and watched the sun sink into the water. The white cliffs looked less white every year. I thought of my grandfather who sailed from these shores to defend Malta. I thought of my mother reciting Kipling by the fire. I thought of my daughter who may never know what it meant to be British. I have resolved to keep a record. Each evening I write by candlelight because the power cuts have begun. I describe the removal of the village sign that once read founded AD 886. I describe the replacement of the street names with Arabic calligraphy. I describe the silence of the bells and the loudness of the call to prayer. I describe the look in the eyes of old men who remember when England was England. Tonight the air smells of curry and the sky is thick with cloud. Somewhere a muezzin sings. Somewhere a teacher tells a class that their country was never great, only cruel. I close my journal and whisper the words I was taught as a boy. I do not care who hears me. I say, God save the Queen.